Hi, good morning. Welcome to the Mind Behind Leadership. We're looking at what's going to be happening in the future. The big talk at the moment is really about what's happening in the workplace, how many changes we've seen going on, how fluid it is, and trying to predict really what's going to happen, not just with the working environment, but with kind of the impact of technology. I am absolutely delighted. I've got the head of people advisory from Lockton's with us, who is Morag Fitzsimons. Morag, good morning.
Good morning, Graham. Nice to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. Morag, just give us a little bit of a background. Can you just tell us a little bit about Lockton's and your role within it?
So Lockton is the world's largest privately owned insurance broker, and I sit within our People Solutions division within Lockton, here in Australia and across the Pacific, and we're part of the broader global Lockton People Solutions offering. And we're really about making sure that we help our clients manage their people risk. We make sure that they're appropriately insured, whether it's workers' compensation, salary continuance, private health. So any of those insurances that support people in their day-to-day lives. And my main focus is really to be at the prevention side of things, so to help organisations set up their people risk and people management systems so that hopefully they don't need to use those insurances. That's my role here at Lockton.
Is that not counterintuitive for an insurance company?
Oh, we're a broker, we're not an insurance company. But look, this is about risk. It's about risk management. They call things accidents for a reason, but it's making sure that organisationally we've met all of our legal obligations, all of our compliance obligations, but more importantly, increasingly I'm seeing employers wanting to be an employer of choice. So what do we offer our employees to help them be productive and manage their work well?
I'm just going to ask you then, what's the difference between the broker and the company?
So the insurance company underwrites the risk and underwrites the cost. A broker, it's our job to make sure we get the best deal and the best product for our clients in that particular market. So we'll work with a range of insurers and agents in respective markets, work out the best deal with the background and the solutions and services that best suit the needs and the risk profile of our clients.
I hear an accent, Morag.
It's funny, I do too. I don't think we're the ones in the room with the accent.
So how did you get to Sydney? How did that happen?
As you can tell by my good Scottish accent, I came out here 34 years ago this November. I came out on a working holiday, fell in love with the country, and I'm still here. So met my husband, who's also Scottish here, interestingly enough. We met here and we have 2 kids, and yeah, loving that Australian life. I've been an Australian longer than I was a Scot in real terms when you look at passport and citizenship. So I've been here a long time.
And what's your background to come to kind of head of people advisory then at Lockton? So what's that journey look like?
So I came out of the banking and insurance industry in the UK. I was in life insurance just before I left for the UK for Australia. And I've been in the workers' compensation, injury and health space now for the 34 years that I've been in Australia. I'm actually a remedial massage therapy, but don't tell anyone. I don't want anyone to know.
Okay, I won't. It's just us. It's just us. It's okay.
And I had run my own business for 21 years before joining Lockton. So it's been that next evolution. So a long time in this injury and health space, probably longer than I care to admit. I'd like to say I was a child prodigy, Graham, but we both know that's not true.
we both were. We both were. That's why it is. So I'm going to be very aware of my accent as well, because we could begin to speak really quickly today, Morag. I know that.
Slow me down if I talk too fast.
I'm curious, because you're having conversations about people, about kind of the risk compliance side of the business, but also you're seeing the change that's happened over the last few years. Kind of what big things have you noticed that's maybe moved in the last 2 or 3 years that we wouldn't necessarily have seen before?
Look, I think the big one's been the flexibility, the working from home mandates, and how we kind of balance working from home and being back in the workplace. We had pre-COVID, there was some flexibility in certain organisations that allowed working from home and that flexibility, but it wasn't a commonplace expectation of employers. Jump forward into COVID, and we went from, some organisations allowing no one to work from home to everyone working from home. And now we're kind of slowly crawling our way back out of that. I think the biggest challenge has been that, whilst employers were quick to move and get people working from home and maintain their businesses very well, one of the things I think that didn't happen was that clarity around expectations that this was a temporary thing. Mm-hmm. And that the expectation would be people would come back into the workplaces post this event. And so we've moved into this, I've been able to do it from home. Why can't I keep doing it from home? I don't want to travel into the office scenario. And so I think employers are really struggling with that balancing act between allowing that flexibility to continue, but still having the benefit of collaboration, collegiate nature of a workforce, of having people working in close proximity. So for me, I think that brought that movement of working from home, I think, probably forward about 5 years in the space of, a couple of months. And I think we're still coming to terms with the realities of that.
When you say coming to terms with kind of working from home and that hybrid working space, what's the impact that you've seen?
I think that employees are much more aware of their capability to work from home and still do their jobs well. Mm-hmm. Now, I think there was this fear that if people weren't visible, they weren't working. And I think that in the vast majority of cases, that myth has been busted. So, I think it's about that value piece of, what do I get from coming into the office, the expectations of how I work and what I deliver. Is really the thing that we're struggling with. So I'm saying that employees who maybe don't get that flexibility ongoing are actually looking for other roles. When we didn't have the big resignation that we saw in the US, but we did have the big reset. People relocated to, more rural areas because they saw this as being a permanent change. And are they going to come back into the cities, or are they going to telecommute, or indeed are they going to physically commute? So the conversation has changed, I think, around what that offering looks like as an employer value proposition. And employees are expecting it to be part of the norm rather than a value add or an extra.
Okay. So when we consider the work from home, what's the impact on the businesses that you've noticed then? We see the kind of the impact on employees, and they're becoming more aware of what is possible and kind of maybe enjoying that different life cycle and the kind of balance between life and work. What's the impact on businesses? Have you noticed anything?
I think it's cultural. A lot of it is cultural. I think having the benefit of people, the loss of those water cooler conversations. I think if I think about Lockton as an example, the benefit of us being in the office is that, I've just got off the phone from this particular client, they have this particular need, can I grab you for 5 minutes and have a conversation about that, versus I've now got to pick up the phone and call Morag and see if I can get hold of it to talk about this. So I think that, and I think that has a knock-on effect in innovation. I think it has a knock-on effect to some extent on productivity, because it might take longer to get to a point where work's completed because of that disconnect. So I think cultural is a big one. I think also it's then about the adoption of inherent risk of employees' homes. So not everyone is got a nice office set up. It's all ergonomically designed. People are working from their dining room tables still. They may have children coming and going. They've got family members around. It's not quite as clean cut and as easy to control as it is in an office environment. So I think we've inherently adopted a higher degree of physical risk, and I think perhaps psychosocial risk as well around email communication is not as benign as we were brought to believe. I think you do get tone in emails that may not be intended, and things can be misconstrued. When you're not physically seeing someone, those facial expressions, etc. Yeah. So I think there's a range of things that are impacting businesses that probably weren't foreseen, or we just didn't think were going to be a permanent change, and they're becoming more entrenched, I think, than they would have been pre-COVID.
It would be good to dig into a couple of those a little bit more, actually. When I was in the US, I worked with an office furniture company very close to a company called Poppin. Great company. And then when everything changed, people weren't working in offices, working from homes, obviously their business changed significantly. And they came out kind of work from home packages very quickly. So they were working with some of the biggest companies in the world to get that set up. I'm curious, is this something that companies have seriously considered about what their risk is with people working from home?
Oh, a mixed bag on that one, I would say. Yes, there are some organisations that have been very focused on it and asked for people to send photographs of where they're working, or to allow them to access office furniture to take home and set up their places. So yes, some have done it very well, some have not, and not really done any form of risk assessment around it. And I think it also comes down to the makeup of a person's home. If you're in a small 1 or 2 bedroom unit, you don't necessarily have a nice area set aside to put a desk and a chair and keep your screen permanently set up and all of that sort of stuff. So again, I think it becomes quite complex, that line between the privacy of a person's home versus developing a workspace that in theory belongs to their employer that sits in that environment. So some organisations have tackled it extremely well. Some have tried to do it and maybe got bitten a little bit by fallout from staff complaining about that. And some have just hoped that, they've maybe issued some guides and hope that people are doing the right thing. And I can't say, to my knowledge, we're seeing floods and floods of, workers' comp claims or injuries happening because of someone's setup, but it's more those incidental things of, tripping over the dog and, when can you do things like hang your washing out while you're working and those sorts of things. So it's all of that sort of stuff that I think, the clarity is not there on for some organisations.
It's interesting because I regularly use the clip from the BBC. I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about, where there was a very extremely serious conversation going on about a war somewhere on the BBC, and all of a sudden this guy's kid came in a kind of a little stroller thing, and his wife's trying to grab the kid live on television. That the last time I looked on YouTube, that's had some like 55 million views.
Yes.
And now it's just every day. At that point, it was really unusual, and it's interesting when we're being invited into someone's home. It's more of an intimate atmosphere. I don't think we've necessarily kind of realised the insights that we're getting into people when we're doing that. You mentioned innovation. It's interesting that the World Economic Forum earlier on this year identified that creative thinking, strategic thinking, being innovative within the office space was going to be crucial to integrate AI, new technologies, and everything like that. I'm fighting with this at the moment. Kind of, how do we balance that and that work from home and not being there? What's your thoughts with that?
Yeah, look, a great challenge, and I know myself, having built a business over a period of time and doing it here now, nothing beats getting in the room together and just throwing stuff up on a whiteboard and seeing what sticks and what slowly slides off as you investigate it further. So I think it's about building that into your flow of work. It's about, if you have a workforce who's predominantly working from home, I think there needs to be points that you bring people together for that, for planning days, for innovation days, for strategic thinking, to really investigate where the company goes from there. When I speak to clients about technology and AI, I find that their employees, particularly their older employees, are very focused on what this means for their jobs, and particularly those who may be in more manual roles or blue-collar roles, or maybe not in the white-collar side where a lot of that work is done. What does it mean for them? Whereas I speak to some other clients who are going, well, the cost of upgrading our systems at the moment is prohibitive. So we're not really thinking about it in those terms. That's something that's for a bit further down the track at the moment. And I think the next 12 to 18 months are going to be tough around the world, but here in Australia, so people aren't necessarily thinking about that. But I think the only way you're going to achieve that is to bring people together, is to build that space and not leave it to an ad hoc function, and to plan and have that future vision and think not just about what's happening now, but what's the plan for the next 12, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years. And again, I'm not necessarily seeing that. We're still trying to do that over Teams in some organisations, and it just doesn't land the same way, I think,
Yeah.
because it's very difficult to have those kind of strategic conversations with 30 people on a call. So, I think that's the only way we're going to be able to do it. And it goes back to the whole thing around what makes human beings unique when you think about the AI space, is that alternative thinking and that ability to throw an idea out and work it around before the machinery is programmed to then carry out those tasks. And I think that's the bit we're not talking about.
I'm curious to know if you've seen any kind of innovative ideas how we get people back to the office or working practices. I'll give you a couple of examples kind of while you think about that. We noticed that the Commonwealth Bank, this is probably the first time I've heard this, are asking employees to spend at least half their working hours each month in the office. Now, it's interesting. All the stats I've seen have always been coming out what's happening per week. The other statistics, we're saying that 87% of companies have kind of mandated office days in the week. That ranges from 1 to 5. But Commonwealth Bank saying each month, I think it's NAB, are saying we've got hybrid arrangements for all staff apart from senior staff. They must be in the office. So I just wonder how that'll work for promotions and people will take on role. But it's really interesting seeing that. I just kind of seeing that people are thinking about it differently. Companies are trying to be flexible here. Have you seen anything that's jumped out? I get you can't name names. I get that, but have you seen anything that jumps out?
It's all the process of negotiation, really, and again, it's about that value proposition of what it means to come into the office. And I don't think, again, many organisations are articulating that. They're mandating a requirement, and people are selecting in or out of that. Yes, does that work for me? Does that not work for me? And if it doesn't work for me, then someone else down the road has got a better deal. I think the realisation is starting to dawn on many workforces, though, that there's going to be a requirement to get back to work in some way, shape or form.
Yeah.
But they're clinging on to the doorknob at the front door as hard as they can before they're dragged back in full time. I think it's about some of the things I have done. The 4-day working week movement was something that was starting to take a bit of momentum before COVID and seemed to die off a bit. But I've seen that as a way of saying to people, okay, well, we want you in. We're going to pay you for a 5-day week, but we want you in the office 4 days a week to work as a team together to make sure the work is done. And as long as the team is achieving what the team needs to do, you can all have, not everyone gets a Friday, not everyone gets a Monday. I've seen it rostered, I've seen it rotated, I've seen a range of different things done on that.
Yeah.
And if you all contribute and all participate, you get this day off as a paid day in effect, to achieve the outcomes of the team. And if one person doesn't pull their weight, you all lose it. So what I've seen in that process is then people going, okay, well, there's value to me coming in because I'm getting paid for 5 days. I'm getting paid, let's say, 40 hours for a 32-hour week. That's going into my super. I'm getting my leave accruals on that basis. Yep. But we've got to come together as a team to work together how we make this work. And doing that from home is more difficult. So all of a sudden, there's value to me in making that step where I might have gone, oh, what's the point? I have a family member who goes into work once a fortnight, and he says it's the least productive day because they catch up, they go to lunch, they come back, they have coffee, then this afternoon, then they have a team meeting, and then they all go home. So the value of that time in the office is actually not there. It's lovely, but it's not there. So I think it's about really being able to say, we need you back in the office for these reasons. Here's the value proposition. And we're not taking something from you, we're giving something to you in this way. So I think, again, and this is the stuff that takes work and it takes time, and you need people on board. So it's not an easy fix. It's not easier to say, they shall be in the office 3 days a week or 2.5 days a week, whatever it is. And if you don't do that, we have a problem. Versus, okay, let's work out what the value proposition is. What's the quid pro quo and all of this?
It's interesting because we've got some clients who mandated full return to the office as soon as that was allowed, and I see very little resistance from anybody there. But when we've got this kind of ambiguity to it about what could happen, I see that causes an issue. I suppose the other one, I was a great advocate of the 4-day working week. until I've kind of seen how the hybrid working situation's going at the moment, and it concerns me making that big decision of let's go to a 4-day working week and it not work, and you'll never be able to reverse it. And that's the kind of you mentioned we're not taking something away from you, we're giving you something. But if we ever have to reverse that, for example, go on for it.
It goes to clarity and it goes to setting expectations. If the expectations are you have a 4-day working week regardless of how you perform, regardless of the impacts on the business, then that's the expectation. If the expectation is, well, you have the 4-day working week as long as these parameters and KPIs are met, as long as you're productive, as long as we're getting these things done, as long as we're not getting killed. And if that happens, if it falls over for these reasons, the consequences are that you all have to come back into work. And there's a signed contract around that basis, a documentation that says, yes, I understand this and I will be required to come in. So I think for me, it's planning. The hybrid piece didn't have a lot of planning around it in a lot of sweeping generalisation. But for a lot of organisations, there wasn't planning around it. So it's very hard to then, when someone says, well, I've worked from home perfectly well for the last 3 years, what's the problem now all of a sudden? So that, I think, is the challenge around it. It's the structure and the infrastructure and the understanding is what's missing with the situation we find ourselves into now. And so I think anybody, whether you're mandating people come in or whether there's certain circumstances that has to be documented, there has to be understanding of if it doesn't work, what happens. Because we fundamentally, I think we're unrealistically optimistic sometimes that everything's going to be fantastic, and often it's not. So what happens when it doesn't work versus what happens whilst it's working?
It's a prenup, isn't it? We're getting a prenup.
Pretty much.
Wow.
I think the interesting thing for me, though, Graham, is it will be interesting to see how people's attitudes change if they then think, well, we're either going into a recession or, depending on your industry, things are very tight. I don't want to make waves. So getting back on the chain and going into the office is better than perhaps losing my job, because they might have to make people redundant, and I could be on that list. So, I don't think we've quite seen the shift. It's great when times are good and we've had employee shortages, and we still do, which I think is why people have been so reticent to go, you're back at work full time Monday. But I think we may start to see a bit of a shift happen as things get tighter and people get more concerned about retention of their employment rather than attraction to employment.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I agree completely. We've kind of probably for the first time in Australia for a long time, we're going to begin to kind of see that little bit of a squeeze next year, and we've got that imbalance of job vacancies, etc. But it's interesting. It's not, we can't just take the headline job numbers because it's industry specific and sector specific, but also the integration of AI and all the other bits and pieces. What's it going to do, and the economy? How's it going to squeeze things? Which takes me into kind of people who've not said, I don't like generalizing, but I'm about to. So here's a spoiler alert. People who've maybe not experienced that at all when we talk about like Gen Z or Gen Z. I'm never quite sure how we're supposed to say it. So I'll say Gen Z.
I refuse to say Z.
Do you? See, I lived in the US, so I kind of half there. This is the first time that Gen Z next year, this is prediction, is that they're going to outnumber baby boomers in the workforce. I wonder what you thought. I'm curious about how kind of that's going to change the dynamics and when we talk about culture in a place. I'm just wondering what the impact of that might be. Have you got any thoughts?
Like raising two of them myself at the moment. A lot of it is attitudinal, and a lot of it is about resilience and expectations. And my boys look at me and go, "Why do you work so hard?" And then I go, see all that stuff you've got in your room, all your tech, all that sort of stuff, that's what I do. So I think it's about expectation. And I don't think, I'm going to sound like my mother here. Sorry, Mum. I'm going to sound like my mother here. I don't think young people today have had it tough. So, I think there's that thing around, it's been good for a lot of young people for a long time. But having said that, we do struggle with young people who come out of school, go to university, have a degree and still can't get a job.
Yep.
So unemployed, it's still, quite high levels of unemployment in that younger cohort, probably higher than most, I think, from last stats. So again, I think it's about mentorship and helping people understand the way we do things around here, what the expectations are around here, what it means when things get tough, what you need to do to hang on to a job. I have a 20-year-old who's had 4 different jobs in 4 different industries now. He's landed somewhere that he likes now. But they have no fear about, pulling the parachute cord and exiting, to go to something else. Whereas when you and I were at school, it was, you don't want to move around too much, you'll get a bad reputation if you're not in the same job for 20 years.
Yeah.
So, I think work has changed, expectations have changed, but I don't think, I think it's really on employers to really manage the expectations of younger people coming into the business, because they do struggle with that, what the requirements are and what the needs are of the business, and nobody cares if you're tired that day, you just got to get in and get it done.
It's Mum, why do you work so hard? Because we were scared. And I'm actually not saying that's a bad thing, interestingly.
Yeah,
but there was I don't know if it was a fear of kind of respect of how we were seeing and what the right thing was. And again, that's not a judgment on what's happening now either, because circumstances are different.
I think our generation and our parents' generations were very defined by the work we did. You were a business person, you were a trades person, you worked in a shop, you were a nurse, you were a teacher, you were, and all of those things, and it almost dictated where we sat in society. Whereas now, I don't think that's the same way. I don't think there's the same sense of identity through our work alone. There's all these other aspects, and I think that's a good thing. There's all these other aspects that define us in our workplaces beyond just the role we perform.
Some of the stuff, when we're talking about communication within a business, it's interesting when we talk about kind of the work communication and social, they're wholly integrated within certain generations. So one of the first things we'll say to somebody if we meet them at a social event, a party or something, like, what do you do? And we constantly driving our guys to say, what does it matter? It doesn't, that's only a point of interest. It's not a definition.
Yes.
And that's interesting.
But the same challenge, I think, if you said to someone, tell me about yourself, one of the first things they'd say is what they do for work.
Yes. Yeah. Rather than their interests, their hobbies, and what really drives them. Absolutely. What they're passionate about. Interesting.
And I think when we meet new people now, other than through social media, often it's in a business environment. It's a function or a meeting. So again, work still drives that sense of where we fit. Certainly in a commercial sense, where do we fit? And I think that's still part of our psyche and our conversation.
That takes me to kind of really nicely to the next part. Is you and I we get surveys, we get all these statistics thrown at us. Some of them aren't really that interesting, but one jumped out a few weeks ago, and it was that belonging had jumped to kind of the very top of and we've done a bit of study on it, a bit of research on this, and it tends to be within the top 3 of what employees want. They want a sense of belonging. Absolutely. And also to work from home, and also to be individual, and also to have this flexibility. So I'm conflicted by it, but it's really interesting that belonging, we were speaking about community big time before COVID, how we create communities, and companies were born out of that. They were born from it, like WeWork and that kind of thing. But sense of belonging seems to be something. Are you seeing anything along those lines?
Look, very much so, and when we think about well-being, so we do some well-being projects for our clients, and the 4 areas we look at is obviously this physical health, psychological health, but we also look at your social connectedness, and we look at then your financial health. And we know that poor financial health and poor social connectedness are 2 of the biggest pre-indicators for poor mental health. So often, those are the things that will drive. They don't sit in isolation of each other, and often we create programs, or organisations that create programs that sit services in isolation of each other. And often when we speak with communities of employees and organisations, it's not that they don't want to come to work, they just don't want to come to work 5 days a week. So they want that hybrid, they want that capacity to be able to have some time at home to focus and not get caught up perhaps in some of the more negative sides of organisational culture, whether it's gossip, whether it's meetings for the sake of meetings, all of those sorts of things. So it's about balance. So, I think that sense of social connected is really important. And when we work with organisations that have more mature employees and we talk about late career planning, it's often the fear of loss of those sorts of things when they retire that keep people at work, or indeed bring people back to work. We know about a third of us who retire will be back at work within 5 years. And it's not always just a financial decision. It's about that loss of connectedness and community that they encounter. They're not necessarily go back to their old employers, but they find some way of building that community through part-time work elsewhere. So it is very important, and I think we underplay that sense of community. And I think when we think about organisational cultures and respect and diversity and inclusion and cultural requirements dependent on these, we miss the mark on that sometimes because we don't understand how important that is to people.
Bring up a really valid point that probably belonging and identity has always been part of it. And I'm just wondering if kind of the new generation coming through are beginning to see that. I often worry when we're talking about belonging and about looking after people and making sure mental health and everything there is that it's seen as fluffy and almost not business essential, because we kind of want again, the stats that we're seeing is everything's spent, money is spent on hard skills, not soft skills. Money is spent on how you do a process rather than how you manage yourself and become more productive rather than just the process. You must come across that a lot.
Look, absolutely. And I think it's one of the biggest things that organisations struggle with when they think about employee well-being. And the vast majority of employers I talk to want to do something to give something back to their employees or to the communities that they operate within. But there's that fine balance between how much is actually the responsibility of the employer versus the responsibility of the individual.
Yep.
And so often we end up with these shopping list of services for people to pick from, but it doesn't necessarily meet their needs. So it's about how do we provide support to people that they can then engage with at their point of need, because you might not know when that is. So I think there's a fine balance between assuming responsibility for everyone's health and needs and community and social connectedness versus building a framework that is part of the organisational DNA that by manner of means supports that in some way or gives people a platform that they can then find additional resources to support them to do the things that they need to do. Sorry, I'm not sure if I've answered that question properly.
Yeah, no, I think I suppose the next question I'm curious about your insights on this is, where does a company start with that? What's the point that they turn around and say, okay, we need to explore this? I'm not talking about making that jump to do it, but where do they actually where do they find the courage to maybe have that exploration?
It's a really interesting one, and I think that we're afraid to ask our employees sometimes because we don't know what the answer. With the old business adage, don't ask the question unless you know the answer.
It's like we never ask customers why they deal with us, just in case we get a bad one.
It's when you say, well, what are we doing well? And they go, well. So actually, now you mention it. So I think for me, it's a discovery phase. It's about, and surveys are fine, but you only get a percentage of your population that will respond to that. And often it's the people who are feeling unhappy about something who will respond to a survey. It's not necessarily the people who are, loving everything you do and feeling fantastic because they go, well, everything's great, I don't need to answer a survey. So it's a combination of a range of things. What we've done in the past is we've done what we called a discovery session. And it is time absorptive, but we've gone round to operations and sat with teams of people and staff and gone, okay, well, what does this look like? What does well-being mean to you? What is well-being to you? Because for some people it might be running and really quite robust exercise. For some people, it might be mindfulness, it might be yoga, it might be Pilates, it might be just getting home before 8 o'clock at night and watching your favourite show on TV, right? So, what's well-being to you? And then what does the organisation do well to support you? What are the organisational drivers that might inhibit well-being? And that's when we get into things like, I'm expected to answer emails at 10 o'clock at night, or I'm on call 24/7, or, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Which can be a little bit confronting, because often you'll get operational challenges, feedback from that, as well as what people want personally. But it's then about saying, well, of these things that we're offering, are they things that people will use? And often, you hear about a wellbeing program at induction, and then you never hear about it again. And then you go out and you find out later you could have got help with something. So as an example, one client we work with who's really investing a lot in this space, they have a fantastic financial system to support people in the time of need. If they have someone in the community who's suffering from disease or needs some extra time, they'll provide some financial support. Now, the number of staff in that business who'd forgotten about that. They had been told originally, but they'd forgotten about it. So that ability to refresh and remind and ask is really important, because, you're spending $301 million we spent in Australia last year on wellbeing programs, and we get about 20% uptake on that. Oh, so wow. How do you make sure that what you're doing, what you're providing is actually meeting the needs of your workforce? Is it something they will use? Do they know it's available? And then how are you measuring whether or not that's having a positive ROI on a business? Are you seeing increased productivity? Are your engagement surveys better? Are you seeing that your workforce is taking less sick leave because they're able to access health services more readily or more regularly? Or how do you measure it? So often we put these things in and we just hope for the best. And it's a little bit like throwing a handful of teeth at an open mouth and hoping some of them will stick. So, it's that sort of work, again, that needs to be done to ask the question and then build from there.
That's really interesting, because if we implemented a new process or a new software system or something that we thought was going to make the job easier, make people more productive, we wouldn't say just go press that button and go use it.
No.
You'd work with people and saying, how do we get that engagement? How do we get people kind of in the mindset that they, maybe even old school, they don't feel guilty about taking that time off and going to yoga or going running or going something? Or how do we get people into kind of new habits?
Yes.
We leave it to chance.
Is a huge piece of this. And I think, surveys and all of those sorts of things are great and are part of all of that. But it is often about permission. It's about giving people permission to go and live, just exactly to your point. So having those sorts of, that ability to understand and discuss is just huge in this space, I think.
With this. Right. A really simple question to finish with, Morag. What's your predictions for the workplace for next year? just a nice small one, nice easy one to finish.
Let me think. Look, I think economically things are getting tougher. We can see it. Yep. We see that contraction in workforces. We see that contraction in people's spending. So things are going to get tight. And so, I think it's about that reality check for everyone, both businesses and employees, around what that's going to look like into the thing. I think there are still challenges with attraction and retention. Mm-hmm. And I think that businesses really, probably more so now than ever, really need to understand what their employee value proposition is, as much as really understanding what how that works in the reverse back to them. And so we're not out of the woods in this for a long way. I think unless you're able to clearly articulate to people what the value is of what you're giving them by having them in the workforce, we're going to continue to see this industrial change. Mm-hmm. We're seeing some big changes to the health and safety legislation in New South Wales next year, where fines for serious injuries are tripling for organisations, doubling for individuals, and we're seeing the requirement around cultural culpability. So if you're allowing poor behaviours, if you're allowing actions to occur, managers maybe not following process or instructing people to work unsafely, then there's that could be taken into consideration in prosecutions. So the whole thing around respect and culture and psychosocial risk is a big thing. So when we talk about communication, we have an obligation under the Act to consult. And so when we talk about these changes, and to your point earlier about you don't just bring a machine and go press the button here to start.
And it feels that from both sides, retaining the staff that we want and people being in the roles that they actually genuinely want to be in. Yes. And maybe having that little bit of continuity and consistency that's maybe been missing over the last few years is going to be really important.
And if I could just one last thing before we finish on that, I think it's about organisations being prepared to think outside of the box. If you have a workforce that's not easy to replace, often people will leave you because they don't understand what the options are, particularly older employees.
Yeah.
They might think there's nothing else for me, so I have to leave because I'm unwell, or it would help me to go part-time or to job share, and organisations go, no, we don't do that, because that can be hard to do from a workforce perspective. But I think that flexibility about how we think about work as organisations and the way that we deliver work as organisations is going to be quite critical.
Morag, I'm absolutely certain that we're going to have more discussions over the coming months, and I'm seeing some kind of headlines. I could go on all morning here, but I know we've both got meetings to go to. So thanks very much for joining us, for giving your insights, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.